Now we come to another highlight of the OFN Conference, the Ned Gramlich Lifetime Achievement Award for Responsible Finance. OFN established this award in 2007 in memory of a former OFN board member and former Federal Reserve Board Governor, Ned Gramlich. We recognize one awardee each year at the OFN Conference. The spirit of the award is to celebrate a person of distinction who has produced a body of work that sets him or her apart within the opportunity finance industry. Here to introduce this year's winner is Julie Eads, President of the New Hampshire Community Loan Fund and 2012 winner of the Ned Gramlich Award. Julie?
Good afternoon. So Michael Swack was a leader of Opportunity Finance before it got that name. He was on the original steering committee that created OFN and on its founding board in 1986. His trademark is the ability to balance a practitioner's mentality and an academic's objectivity. He can articulate impact and risk while designing for scale and sustainability. I always feel challenged, humbled, and ambitious after listening to his ideas. Michael was board president of the Institute for Community Economics in 1980 when Chuck Mathai created a grassroots-style loan fund for affordable housing. While Chuck may have touched the Sisters of Mercy's religious impulse to use their retirement funds to help the poor, it was Michael's insistence that there be loan policies that gave the sisters real faith in Chuck's financing. Those original loan policies became the core documents of startup CDFIs in New Hampshire, Boston, Philadelphia, Vermont, Northern California, and for all the others who used them as their original templates. He showed how to manage risk while defying the norms of Main Street market about what people with low incomes could accomplish for themselves. Michael tells the story of his first venture in opportunity finance as an undergraduate in Madison, Wisconsin in the 70s. Commissioned to try to develop student cooperative housing, Michael went to the library and took sample bond documents and mimeographed them to raise money from local investors. The organization's attorney was horrified when he found out, and he made Michael undo them all. I am personally grateful that Michael created the New Hampshire Community Loan Fund in 1983, when students in his master's program couldn't get financing for the technical assistance projects that they were helping with. I'm lucky he hired me, and that he's been a mentor, a partner, and a friend since then. He still actively serves on our board of directors in his typically thoughtful and unassuming way. And now I have to go off script to ask you to help out. We have resolved to create a Michael Swack Fund to promote innovation and strategies that scale. So in an effort to make sure that he is at least a little more embarrassed than he was when he came in at this honor, I'm asking you all to make contributions in his honor to this fund, and so that every generation after this will know what he did, and there will be practical things happening in his honor every year from now on. I'm glad you clapped for that. I was a little worried. I don't think you're supposed to solicit from the stage, but couldn't help myself. So this is the 25th anniversary of the fund, so it goes without saying Michael contributed to the original draft CDFI fund legislation and testified to the Senate Banking Committee in favor of the bill that created the CDFI fund in 1994. And just the bookends of this, last week I listened to an interview with the last 3 CDFI fund directors, and twice those directors referred to Michael Swack's research and publications for how they contribute to best practices, innovation, and public policy. Our industry is lucky that Michael is also a great teacher. His workshops at this conference on measuring impact, capitalization, and industry trends are always well attended. Hundreds of CDFI employees and consultants have benefited from his annual Fundamentals Training Institute with OFN. What I love is Michael makes research actionable. He founded and leads the Financial Innovations Roundtable and also the Center for Impact Finance at the University of New Hampshire. His approach is collaborative, bringing diverse perspectives together to advance our field. After all, we're just making this up, right? So might as well make it up together. He brings the necessary academic rigor to the data, but his real joy is adapting conventional market mechanisms into tools that we can use so people with low incomes can maximize their potential and act more robustly in the economy. For 40 years, Michael's work has often been behind the scenes, making this award the perfect honor for a humble man. Congratulations to Michael Swack, the winner of the 2019 Ned Gramlich Lifetime Achievement Award for Responsible Finance.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And thank you to OFN for this honor. I really am humbled by this honor. And I also want to thank Julie, a longtime partner. She said 40 years, and I was like, oh my gosh. We had a picture, I don't know if they showed it at all, but there was a picture that she found that she sent me the other day where we both look like we're about 12 years old, which is about what we were. On a personal note, I want to thank my wife, Jane Edelman, who's here, who's a wonderful human being who I get to spend most of my days with. I'm so thankful for. Also, my children, Eric and Jeremy, are here. A special treat, both my sisters are here, Judith and Terry, and Judith's husband, Terry, and my sister-in-law, Susan Edelman. Thank you for coming. I also want to thank my many friends and colleagues and many students over the years, many of whom are here today. Thank you. One of the most fun things to do is to be a teacher because mostly what you do is learn. So what I've done is being able to ask a lot of questions over the years, learn from my students, and I can't really think of a better job because every day I get to do something different. I can do capitalization strategies one day, training the next, research, project finance, and I'm constantly learning from all of them. Today, I just want to briefly reflect on some of my experiences, particularly my earlier ones, and then talk about the challenges we face. Most of us in the room know about those challenges, but I think it's worth raising those challenges so we can keep in mind the type of work that's still ahead. I also hope to do it without insulting anyone or causing any arguments. And, you know, it's easy to just say, oh, well, he's wrong about that. That's fine. It wouldn't be the first time. Right, Jane? So I did start by selling bonds illegally. The one line that sticks in my head from that is when our attorney called and said, you know, Michael, the state of Wisconsin has laws to protect its citizens from people like you. And I thought, really? That, you know, I didn't think it was that bad, but yeah, maybe they should have other ones. So Julie mentioned Chuck Mathai, and early on I met Chuck Mathai, who's really the most unusual person I've met, who had an absolute commitment to principles of fairness and justice. The big issue that he dealt with at the time and why we created a loan fund was working on land trusts and land ownership. He was the director of the Institute for Community Economics. He asked me to start a loan fund to support land and housing, because he believed these are commodities that shouldn't be bought and sold. His idea was, why should land be bought and sold? Nobody here created it. It was created, well, by someone else, by others, by the spirits. And so why should people benefit from something they didn't create? I know it's a principle that Native Americans often talk about. And with apologies to my children, I always say, so have you heard this story before? And it's always, yeah, about 30 times, Dad. But one of my roommates as an undergraduate was a member of the United Nations. Some of you here may still remember him, Charlie Hill. Anyone here remember Charlie? Oh, that's so sad. As my son met him. Charlie unfortunately died of cancer about 5 or 6 years ago. Charlie always billed himself as the first Native American stand-up comic. And he was the funniest guy I ever met, really. We'd sit down for breakfast in the morning and he would just make me laugh, starting at, like 7:30 in the morning. Charlie had a great routine and he had a really good one about land. And what made me really happy, my son Jeremy actually retweeted this, is that he's still credited for this joke. I don't do it as well as Charlie, but here goes. So I was giving my routine one day, standing up in front of this club, and this one guy, he was just harassing me the whole time. Harassing. I was trying to do my best, but every joke I gave, he harassed me. And finally, he yelled at me, and he said, "Why don't you go back to where you came from?" And Charlie said, "So I camped in his backyard that night." You can understand why it was retweeted again recently, the "why don't you go back where you came from" line. So, Chuck believed in the land trust model and the fact that it was important to own and control the land because that's how you stop gentrification. I still believe that's a tool that CDFIs need to be more involved in because really, if we're going to stop gentrification and people losing their land, the land has to be owned commonly through a trust. A couple of the first loans I made were notable, and you probably have similar stories, but let me tell you about a couple of them. Speaking of community land trusts, we co-authored a book at the Institute for Community Economics in 1981 on community land trusts, and just after that book came out, we got a call from a politician who said that he was very interested in the land trust model. Could we come and talk to him? So my colleague John Davis and I drove up to Burlington, Vermont, and met with the newly elected mayor of Burlington, Vermont, Bernie Sanders. And we told him about the community land trust, and he thought this was a great idea. It's ironic in some sense today that still the largest community land trust and the most successful is in, of all places, Burlington, Vermont. And where it exists, the neighborhoods around it have all increased, but in the community land trust, now, going back from 1981, is still affordable housing. I think it's still an important message for us to look at. It's how do we maintain this affordability? Chuck also looked at other things. We were doing agriculture and sustainable agriculture even back then. And there was a project he was interested in, he sent me to and said, why don't you go check this out? There are these two guys who want to start a business through a nonprofit. So I went and checked it out, and there were these two guys, pretty scruffy looking actually, and I came back and I said, well, they want to start a business, but they don't have a business plan. So I don't know how we can lend them without a business plan. And Chuck said, well, why don't you go back and volunteer to write the business plan for them if it's a good idea? And I thought, well, he probably knows what he's talking about. What did I know? So I went back there and I talked to them and I wrote the business plan for these two guys who decided to name their company Stonyfield Farm Yogurt. That was like our second or third loan was to them to start the business, a really sort of crazy business at the time because they didn't even, here's the irony, own the land on which they were farming to milk the cows and then make their yogurt. So I got some pretty interesting experiences early on because of Chuck. But what Chuck did most was ground me in purpose, this question of why do we do the work? Chuck was the driving force behind the creation of what is now this organization. He'd be surprised. Our very first meeting, and Julie was at it, there may be a couple others, was at a religious retreat in Waltham, Massachusetts, where we all stayed in dormitory rooms. And we've actually come quite a way since then, haven't we? And Chuck was also afraid that we would lose touch with the mission. When the idea of OFN first came up, and I don't think this story is told even by Cliff, who covered just about everything in his book, and thank you, Cliff, for a wonderful book. Just fills us in a lot on what happened in the history of community development finance, among other things. We really didn't, he was concerned about mission. When OFN idea first came up, his idea was they should all be affiliates of ICE. When we first did the work, the idea is, well, the funds that we're helping create in Boston and New Hampshire and Philadelphia and beyond, his concern was, what if they don't stay to the mission? What if the community loan funds get off course? What if something becomes more important than the mission? And we talked about it a lot and eventually said, but it doesn't make any sense to have ICE be a national organization with all these affiliate loan funds. The whole idea of community development is to have local ownership and control. Chuck grudgingly gave in, but it was interesting that the initial formation of the organization had this discussion about how do we organize ourselves. Let's fast forward a number of years now. We have a lot to be proud of. I'm not going to give you any numbers because Jody just gave you all the numbers that are important numbers, and Lisa before that, but we're in the billions. The field is strong, it's growing, it's attracting more investment. Our work and the work of others are showing that CDFIs are reaching communities and people who are unserved or underserved. Our studies show this with all the data that we've been able to collect. And contrary to what's always been conventional belief, repayment rates have always been very high among CDFIs. Furthermore, we're expanding our reach by aligning interests, and this is really key. It used to be just we were on our own, but now we're aligning interests with all sorts of different sectors, health sectors, hospitals, workforce groups, in ways that we didn't before to reach more impact. But positivity can also be an impediment to progress. That is, if we talk too much about all the positive stuff we do, we think about where we need to do more. We have a long way to go. Everybody in this room knows it. And a lot of the work that's gone on the last couple of days has talked about the kind of work that has to happen. We still deal with bad outcomes all the time. There's not enough decent housing. There's not enough quality jobs. We're dealing with systemic racism and injustice in our communities. And all of us sometimes wonder, I think, when we wake up in the morning and read the news, are things actually getting better or worse? We're not really sure. I know some days I'm thinking, oh my gosh, I can't believe this. I should go back to sleep. But I want to focus on three basic challenges that the field faces and hope that we can address these challenges head on. The first one is, how can we better understand and promote good outcomes? How can we learn more about what we actually do, how it makes people's lives better? People have talked about that, how do we go from outputs to outcomes? And most of the research that's even done doesn't tell us that. But that's really why we're doing this work, right? It's like we want people's lives to be better. But in many instances, we wonder, well, does making a loan make somebody's life better? Well, maybe it does, and maybe it doesn't, but we don't really know very well. I'm a little bit concerned. The recent Nobel Prize winners, Duplo and Banerjee, really rely completely on randomized controlled trials. So what they say is the only way we really know if something is better is we get lots and lots of people, and we divide them randomly into two groups, and we give one of them the treatment and the other we don't give the treatment, and then we watch over a long period of time and we measure and see who gets better. Well, not exactly practical for our field, and probably unethical as well to try and do that. Although there are instances, and I certainly believe in research that's rigorous, but it's a challenge. Can we learn more about the things we do that actually make the biggest difference in people's lives? It would be interesting to know, what is it that CDFIs do that actually makes the biggest difference? Are there certain types of loans where we see greater impact over a longer period of time? If so, can we focus more on that? The problem with the work that we do in trying to measure and understand impact is we don't really know. We do a lot of stuff, but we don't really know what's working well and what isn't in terms of people's lives. The next two challenges are really existential. Yeah, I'm not going to get philosophical, don't worry. In different ways, though. One we talk about all the time, but really is a challenge, and that is sustainability. Within the CDFI field, we're challenged by issues around our sustainability as institutions. There are over 1,000 CDFIs. So here's a question. Do we really need 1,000 CDFIs? Is 1,000 CDFIs better? Is more CDFIs going to make the field more sustainable? Should there be fewer of us, but institutions that are more sustainable? Should we consolidate in some ways? If we did, would this necessarily address the issue? The answers, of course, are, I have no idea. But we do need to address this question more directly. I know there are a couple that have gone through it. In the room, we have Capital for Change we've worked with. I know Cal, I think you're here, Cal, are you here? Cal, yeah, you could give a whole session on this. But Cal is one of the few people who, with his colleagues, have merged several CDFIs together with the intent of trying to have more impact. And we know it's really difficult, it's really hard. I worked with them in the beginning, had a chance to go back and talk to them a few months ago. And here's the issue. We may all think it's better to be more efficient, but what are the hardest things you talk about when you talk about a question like, should we merge? Usually it doesn't come up about how we can have more impact, although that's underneath. The biggest impediments are, where would our office be? Who would be the CEO? Would enough of my board members become the new board members of the organization? Not that those are unimportant issues. Obviously, if it's your job, then, it's an important issue. But it often confuses what we need to look at in terms of what will make the people we lend to better off. So that's something we need to look at, is how do we become more sustainable, and should there be fewer of us? The second existential challenge is the climate emergency and the role of CDFIs. Yes, we're tiny compared to the overall capital markets and institutional deposits and that sort of thing, but we've already demonstrated that we can have an outsized influence on outcomes in the field. I would really like us to see, and very happy that OFN is forming this group around the climate emergency, particularly since our communities, the ones we serve, are disproportionately affected by it. What practices can we adopt to accurately assess the climate risk in our own loan portfolios? I'd like to see us develop a protocol for CDFIs that measures that. How do we adapt our risk and asset quality metrics to take into account risks now exacerbated by climate change? How can we develop more products and promote more clean energy and address the climate challenge through our lending? Yes, there are a few CDFIs doing this, but how do we begin to do it more as a field, as all CDFIs, and to influence others? I really feel that if we had just one big bank said, we're going climate neutral by 2030, that would be a tipping point. And you know what? Eventually there will be. We'll see who the first one will be, but it will be a tipping point. So let's come together as a field and address these challenges. They're serious challenges, but as small as we are overall, we can have a huge impact. I've talked about a huge impact, but let me end today with a story really about one person. And I'll call this story, Who Makes the Rules? I don't usually name my stories, but I was writing this down and I thought, well, let's give this story a name. Who makes the rules? We have our meeting occasionally at the New Hampshire Community Loan Fund. I'm not sure if it was at this meeting, where we have a meeting in one of the manufactured housing cooperatives that we financed. After one of these meetings, I was hanging out and talking to some of the residents, and just before I left, I met this woman who was, I have to be careful now, I was an older woman, but this was, story was maybe 15, 20 years ago. She was probably in her late 70s. And as usual, I asked her, so how do you like living here? That was the question, just to hear what she had to say. She took a deep breath and she said, well, let me tell you a story, young man. And I thought, well, this could take a while, but I don't have anywhere I have to be. And she said, when I was born, and I thought, well, this could be a really long story. When I was born into a family where my father made all the rules, and we did what he said. He was a strict disciplinarian, and I did what he said or else. When I went to school, my teacher made all the rules. I was rewarded for good behavior, and that meant being quiet and compliant. When I went to church, the minister made all the rules. We did what we were supposed to do there, and I followed those rules. After I graduated to high school, I went to work. My boss made all the rules. I had learned in high school civics class, I don't think they do that anymore, all about democracy and how it was really important. I should be proud because we lived in a democracy. But I didn't really get it until now. I said, what happened now? She said, well, since I joined the cooperative, and I ran and I got elected to the board, it's the first time in my entire life, and I'm 79 years old, that I've actually made a decision and had input. It's my first experience where I get to be part of the decision-making. She's just one person, but forget all the randomized control trials. She demonstrates the power of our work today. Thank you very much.